What if everything you see, sky, stars, animals, even you, was made in just 6 days? This is the creation story from Genesis chapters 1 and 2, the beginning of everything. In the beginning, the earth was empty and dark. Then God said, "Let there be light." And light appeared. Over 6 days, he created the sky, oceans, land, plants, animals, stars, and finally, humans. Adam and Eve were placed in a garden called Eden, a paradise meant for joy and relationship with God. On the 7th day, God rested, not because he was tired, but to set an example of rest and reflection. The world was made with purpose, and so were you. One bite of fruit, and the whole world changed. This is the story of Genesis chapters 2 and 3, Adam, Eve, and the first sin. God placed Adam and Eve in a beautiful garden called Eden, filled with trees, rivers, and life. They could enjoy it all, but God gave them one command: do not eat from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. Then a serpent appeared and tempted Eve. It claimed the fruit would make her like God. Eve took a bite and gave some to Adam. In an instant, their eyes were opened. They felt shame and hid from God. Sin had entered the world. Because of this choice, Adam and Eve were sent out of Eden. Life would be harder. But even then, God gave hope. One day someone would come to defeat evil and restore what was lost. The choices we make matter. But God's love never fails. The first murder in history wasn't committed by a stranger, but by a brother. This is the story from Genesis chapter 4, the tragedy of Cain and Abel. Cain and Abel were the sons of Adam and Eve. Both gave offerings to God. Abel brought the best portions of his flock, while Cain brought some of his crops. God looked with favor on Abel's offering, but not on Cain's. Instead of repenting, Cain grew jealous, angry, bitter. God warned him, "Sin is crouching at your door. It desires to have you, but you must rule over it." But Cain ignored the warning. He led Abel into a field and killed him. When God asked where Abel was, Cain replied, "Am I my brother's keeper?" But nothing is hidden from God. As punishment, Cain was marked and sent away to wander, far from Eden and the land of his family. This story shows how sin escalates when left unchecked, but it also reminds us that God still speaks, still warns, and still sees the heart.
The world was so evil, God hit reset with a flood. This is the story of Genesis 6 to 9, Noah and the Ark. People had become completely wicked. Violence filled the earth, and every thought in the human heart was evil. God was heartbroken and decided to wash the earth clean. But one man found favor in God's eyes, Noah. God told Noah to build a massive ark, big enough for his family and 2 of every kind of animal. It had never even rained like this before, but Noah obeyed. When the ark was ready, the rain began. It poured for 40 days and 40 nights. The whole earth flooded. Mountains disappeared beneath the water. But inside the ark, Noah, his family, and the animals were safe. Eventually, the rain stopped. The water slowly went down. Noah sent out a dove, and it returned with an olive leaf. Dry land had appeared. When Noah and the animals left the ark, God made a promise. He would never flood the earth again. As a sign, he placed a rainbow in the sky, a reminder of his mercy. This story reminds us that even when the world turns dark, God still makes a way for those who walk with him. They tried to build a tower to heaven, but God shut it down. This is the story from Genesis 11, verse 1 to 9, the Tower of Babel. At this time, the whole world spoke one language. Everyone understood each other. People moved east and settled in a land called Shinar. There, they had a bold idea. Let us build a city with a tower that reaches to the heavens. Let's make a name for ourselves. They weren't just building high, they were building with pride. But God saw what they were doing, and he knew where it would lead. More pride, more rebellion. So he confused their language. Suddenly, no one could understand each other. The people stopped building and scattered across the earth. The place was called Babel, which means confusion. This story shows us what happens when we chase greatness without God. He knows how to bring down pride and protect us from ourselves. 2 cities were warned to turn from evil, but only one man escaped the fire. This is the story from Genesis 8 and verse 16 to 33 and Genesis 19 verse 1 to 29, the destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah. God told Abraham that he planned to destroy the cities of Sodom and Gomorrah because of their extreme wickedness. Abraham pleaded with God, "If there are 50 righteous people there, will you spare the city?" God said yes. Abraham kept asking 45, 40, 30, all the way down to 10. And still, God said yes. But sadly, there weren't even 10. 2 angels went to Sodom and found only Lot, Abraham's nephew, trying to live righteously in the middle of chaos. They warned him, "Take your family and leave. God is going to destroy this place." At dawn, fire and sulfur rained from the sky. The cities were wiped out. Lot escaped with his 2 daughters, but his wife looked back and was turned into a pillar of salt. This story shows us that God is patient and just, but also holy. He warns before he judges, and he always rescues the righteous.
What if God asked you to give up the one thing you loved most? This is the story from Genesis 22, verse 1 to 19, the test of Abraham's faith. God spoke to Abraham and said, "Take your son, your only son Isaac, whom you love, and offer him as a sacrifice on a mountain I will show you." Abraham obeyed. Early the next morning, he took Isaac and 2 servants and began the journey. After 3 days, they reached the place. Isaac looked around and asked, "Father, we have the fire and the wood, but where is the lamb?" Abraham replied, "God will provide." Abraham built an altar, laid the wood, and placed Isaac on it. Just as he raised the knife to sacrifice his son, an angel of the Lord called out, "Abraham, do not lay a hand on the boy." Abraham looked up and saw a ram caught in a bush. He offered the ram instead. God said, "Because you have not withheld your son, I will bless you. Your descendants will be as numerous as the stars." This story shows us that faith means trusting even when we don't understand, and God always provides. 2 brothers were born, but only one would get the blessing. This is the story from Genesis 25, verse 19 to 34, and Genesis 27. Isaac and Rebekah had twin sons. Esau came out first, red and hairy. Jacob followed, grabbing his brother's heel. They were different in every way. Esau loved hunting. Jacob preferred to stay at home. One day, Esau came back from the field, starving. Jacob was cooking stew. Esau said, "Give me some of that." Jacob replied, "Sell me your birthright first." Esau agreed. Just like that, he gave up his rights as the firstborn for a bowl of stew. Years later, when Isaac was old and nearly blind, he told Esau, "Go hunt and make me a meal, then I'll bless you." But Rebekah overheard and helped Jacob pretend to be Esau. He wore animal skins to feel hairy and brought food quickly. Isaac was unsure, but he blessed Jacob anyway. Moments later, Esau came in and realized what had happened. He was heartbroken, but the blessing had already been given. This story reminds us that God's plans often unfold in unexpected ways, and our choices have lasting impact. A man on the run laid his head on a rock and saw a ladder to heaven. This is the story from Genesis 28, verse 10 to 22. Jacob's dream at Bethel. Jacob was running for his life. After tricking Esau out of his blessing, he fled to his uncle Laban's land. On the way, he stopped for the night, using a stone as a pillow. While he slept, he had a dream. He saw a ladder reaching from earth to heaven, with angels going up and down. At the top stood the Lord. God spoke to Jacob and said, "I am the Lord, the God of Abraham and Isaac. I will give you this land, and your descendants will be as numerous as the dust of the earth. I am with you and will not leave you." When Jacob woke up, he was amazed. He said, "Surely the Lord is in this place, and I didn't know it." He named the place Bethel, which means house of God. He set up the stone as a pillar and made a vow, "If God will be with me and provide for me, then the Lord will be my God." This story reminds us that even in lonely places, God shows up. He keeps his promises and meets us where we are. He worked 7 years for the woman he loved, but woke up married to someone else. This is the story from Genesis chapter 29 and chapter 30, the marriages of Jacob, Leah, and Rachel. Jacob arrived in the land of his uncle Laban and met Rachel at a well. He loved her immediately. Laban agreed to let Jacob marry her if he worked for 7 years. Jacob did, and the Bible says those 7 years felt like days because of his love for her. But on the wedding night, Laban tricked him. In the morning, Jacob realized he had married Leah, Rachel's older sister. Laban said, "In our culture, the older daughter must marry first." He offered Rachel too if Jacob worked another 7 years. Jacob agreed. The two sisters became rivals. Leah felt unloved, but God saw her pain and gave her children. Rachel couldn't have any at first and gave her servant to Jacob to bear sons on her behalf. Leah did the same. Eventually, Rachel gave birth to Joseph. This story shows how even through jealousy, pain, and deception, God was still working out his plan to build the family that would become the nation of Israel. This is the story from Genesis chapter 31. When Jacob fled from his uncle Laban, Jacob had worked for Laban for 20 years, 14 years for his 2 wives and 6 more for his flocks. But Laban kept changing the rules, trying to cheat him out of what was fair. God told Jacob, "Go back to the land of your fathers. I will be with you." Jacob gathered his wives, children, and flocks, and quietly left without telling Laban. 3 days later, Laban found out and chased after him. When he caught up to Jacob, God warned Laban in a dream not to harm him. The two men confronted each other. Jacob said, "If God had not been with me, you would have sent me away empty-handed." No matter who stands in the way, God's protection is real. In the end, they made a peace agreement. They set up a stone pillar as a witness between them and went their separate ways. This story reminds us that when God says go, he also goes with us.
The night before facing his brother, Jacob wrestled with someone, but it wasn't Esau. This is the story from Genesis chapter 32 and chapter 33. When Jacob wrestled with God and met Esau again, Jacob was returning home after many years, but he was afraid. Esau was coming to meet him with 400 men. Jacob remembered what he had done, the blessing he stole, and the anger he left behind. That night, Jacob was alone. A man appeared and wrestled with him until sunrise. As the struggle continued, Jacob realized this was no ordinary man. It was God in human form. The man touched Jacob's hip and dislocated it. But Jacob held on and said, "I will not let you go unless you bless me." And when we wrestle with God, he does not push us away. He transforms us. God said, "Your name will no longer be Jacob, but Israel, because you have struggled with God and with humans and have overcome." The next day, Jacob limped toward Esau. But instead of fighting, Esau ran to him and embraced him. The two brothers wept together. This story shows us that healing often begins when we stop running and face what we fear.
He dreamed of greatness, but his brothers turned those dreams into a nightmare. This is the story from Genesis chapter 37, the beginning of Joseph's story. Joseph was just 17. Out of all his 12 sons, Jacob loved Joseph the most, even gave him a special robe, a beautiful coat of many colors. He told them, "We were binding grain in the field, and suddenly my bundle stood up, and your bundles gathered around and bowed to mine." His brothers saw it, and they were jealous. They hated him. Then Joseph had a dream. "The sun, the moon, and 11 stars were bowing down to me." That didn't help. But Joseph didn't know what they would cost him. Then he had another dream. Even his father was shocked. "Do you really think your mother and I and your brothers will bow to you?" The dreams were from God. One day, Jacob sent Joseph to check on his brothers in the fields. When they saw him coming, they said, "Here comes the dreamer." They made a plan. "Let's kill him and see what becomes of his dreams." But Reuben, the oldest, said, "Don't kill him. Just throw him into this pit." He secretly hoped to rescue Joseph later. But that doesn't mean the dream is dead. It just means the story isn't over. So they ripped off his robe and threw him into a dry well. Then they sat down to eat. While they were eating, a group of traders came by, heading to Egypt. Judah had an idea. "Why kill him? Let's sell him." So for 20 pieces of silver, they sold their own brother as a slave. Then they dipped his colorful robe in goat's blood and brought it to their father. "Is this Joseph's coat?" they asked. Jacob believed a wild animal had killed his son. He tore his clothes and wept for days. No one could comfort him.
He was sold as a slave, thrown into prison, and forgotten. But God never left him. This is the story from Genesis chapter 39 to chapter 41. Joseph's rise in Egypt. Joseph was taken to Egypt and sold to a man named Potiphar, an officer of Pharaoh. Even though Joseph was a slave, God was with him. Everything he did succeeded. Potiphar trusted Joseph and made him in charge of his entire house. But then came false accusations. Potiphar's wife tried to seduce Joseph. When he refused, she lied and said he attacked her. Joseph was thrown into prison even though he had done nothing wrong. Still, God was with him. In prison, Joseph again rose to favor. He was put in charge of the other prisoners. One day, 2 men from Pharaoh's court were thrown into prison, a cupbearer and a baker. They both had strange dreams, and Joseph, with God's help, explained what they meant. The baker would die. The cupbearer would be restored. Joseph told the cupbearer, "Please remember me when you're free." But the cupbearer forgot. 2 years passed. Then Pharaoh had 2 disturbing dreams. No one could explain them. That's when the cupbearer finally remembered Joseph. Joseph was brought out of prison. Pharaoh said, "I've heard you can interpret dreams." Joseph replied, "I cannot, but God can." Pharaoh told his dreams. Joseph said, "God is showing what will happen. 7 years of abundance are coming. Then 7 years of famine." Pharaoh was amazed and put Joseph in charge of the entire land of Egypt, second only to Pharaoh himself. This story reminds us that even when people forget you, God never does. Every delay, every disappointment, God can use it to prepare you for something greater.
They bowed before him, begging for food, not knowing he was their own brother. This is the story from Genesis chapter 42 to chapter 45. When Joseph met his brothers again, the famine reached Canaan, and Jacob sent his sons to Egypt for food. They bowed before the Egyptian ruler in charge, not realizing it was Joseph. He recognized them, but they didn't know him. He tested them, accused them of being spies, and demanded they bring back their youngest brother, Benjamin. When they returned, Joseph saw Benjamin and broke down in tears. But he had one last test. He planted a silver cup in Benjamin's sack, then accused him of stealing. Judah begged, "Take me instead. Don't let our father lose another son." That's when Joseph revealed the truth. "I am Joseph. Is my father still alive?" The brothers were stunned, but Joseph said, "You meant evil against me, but God meant it for good." He forgave them and told them to bring their father to Egypt. This story reminds us that God can turn betrayal into blessing. Forgiveness brings healing, and his plan always wins. Before he died, Jacob spoke a blessing over every one of his sons. This is the story from Genesis chapter 46 to chapter 50, the final chapter of Joseph's story and the end of Genesis. Jacob and all his family moved to Egypt, just as Joseph had asked. Pharaoh welcomed them, and they lived in the land of Goshen. Before Jacob died, he called each of his sons and spoke a blessing over them, some with correction, some with promise. To Judah, he said, "The scepter will not depart from you," pointing ahead to the coming Messiah. After blessing them, Jacob breathed his last. Joseph wept over him and buried him in the land of Canaan, just as his father had asked. Later, Joseph's brothers feared he might take revenge. But Joseph said, "Do not be afraid. You meant evil against me, but God meant it for good, to save many lives." Joseph lived to see his great-grandchildren. Before he died, he made the Israelites promise, "One day, God will bring you back to the land he promised. When he does, take my bones with you." This story reminds us that even at the end of life, God's promises still stand. He works through every generation to fulfill his plan. We are going through the Bible from cover to cover, one story at a time. Subscribe and follow Gospel Feed to keep going. See you in the next one.